Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace a powerful idea, one that starts with the anxieties of a small child and scales all the way up to the hidden mechanics of our modern world. We're going to see how the very blueprint for our individual fears might just be the blueprint for society itself. So, our starting point is this quote from Freud. He had this really radical idea that our deepest anxieties aren't just random. Nope, he believed they're forged in a very specific developmental chain, a sequence that begins the moment we are born. You can think of it as a kind of progression of fear that ends up shaping our entire inner world. Freud actually called this the chain of danger. And it's this fascinating theory that explains how our fears aren't static. They evolve as we grow up. They start out as these vague external threats, and over time, they morph into these complex internal conflicts that we carry around with us for the rest of our lives. So Freud mapped this whole evolution across 4 key stages. It all begins with an infant's terror of total helplessness. Then, as we become toddlers, we start to dread losing the people we rely on, what he called the fear of object loss. Next up is a more specific fear of bodily harm, which he pretty controversially termed the danger of castration. And then finally, the whole thing turns inward. The danger moves inside our heads, and we become afraid of our own conscience, that all-seeing internal judge, the superego. So you see the pattern here, right? The really crucial part is this journey inward. The source of our anxiety shifts from the big scary world outside, a world we can't control, to the judge and jury living right inside our own skulls. The fear of being punished by someone else becomes that nagging voice of guilt and self-criticism. Okay, and this is where the idea just explodes in scale. What if this personal blueprint of fear doesn't just stay cooped up inside our heads? What if that exact same progression, that same chain of defenses, is the hidden architecture of our entire social world? And that brings us to this mind-bending theory, that society itself basically has a psyche. It has its own psychological structure, a whole hierarchy of defenses designed to manage social anxiety and maintain order, much like an individual mind does. Now, to really get this social structure, we have to get a handle on 2 key concepts. Think of them as 2 completely opposite ways of dealing with the rules. On one side, you've got neurosis. This is the mindset of the rule follower, the person who colors inside the lines, all to keep anxiety and chaos at a distance. And on the other side, you have perversion. This is the mindset that basically rips up the rule book and says, I'm going to do what I want and I don't care about your prohibitions. Society, according to this theory, is defined by the constant tug of war between these 2 forces. And what's really fascinating is how these positions are all locked into a defensive chain. The whole rule follower mindset neurosis really exists to control the chaos of rule-breaking perversion. But even within neurosis itself, there's a pecking order. The obsessional, the one who loves lists, order, and control, is always trying to manage the hysteric, who is constantly asking why and poking holes in the system. The hysteric, in turn, is trying to avoid becoming a phobic, someone just paralyzed by a single overwhelming fear. And what's the ultimate source of that deep phobic anxiety? Well, it all circles back down to the chaos of perversion at the very bottom of the chain. And this gives us the master key to how modern power really works. You don't need to enforce rules with an iron fist. Instead, if you can control how society talks about enjoyment, what's cool, what's forbidden, what you're supposed to want, you can trigger this entire defensive chain and basically shape how an entire population thinks, all without them even realizing it. This all brings us to a really radical shift in how social power has operated over the last century or so. There's been this fundamental inversion, a complete flipping of the central command that governs our lives. The old power structure, the old model, was all about prohibition. Its motto was basically, "Thou shalt not." Its main goal was to maintain a rigid, predictable order, and it relied on those rule-following obsessionals to keep everyone in line. But the new power structure, it's completely different. Its core command isn't no, it's enjoy. It actually demands that you be authentic, that you be creative, that you express yourself. And to make that happen, it empowers the questioning hysterics to go out and challenge and tear down those old, rigid systems. So this new system of power doesn't just change the rules of the game, it actually produces an entirely new kind of person, a dominant personality type that is perfectly suited to its demands. The social critic Christopher Lasch called this figure the pathological narcissist. This is the person who looks fantastic on the outside, they're successful, well-adjusted, the whole package, but internally they're incredibly fragile, haunted by this deep sense of emptiness. They are constantly performing for an audience, desperate for admiration to confirm their own self-worth. And they're suffering under the relentless pressure to always be achieving and, most importantly, enjoying it all. Yeah, so that internal voice of authority has completely changed. The old paternal superego was kind of like a strict father, making you feel guilty for breaking a clear, obvious rule. That's been replaced by a new maternal superego. And this new inner critic is much more subtle. It doesn't punish you for doing something wrong. It makes you feel deeply anxious for not being interesting enough, not creative enough, or not authentic enough. So, let's tie all of this together. We've gone from a society of no to a society of enjoy. We've seen how this creates a brand new kind of person. So what does this ultimately mean for our whole concept of freedom today? And right here, we arrive at the central paradox of modern life. A culture that endlessly celebrates freedom and choice and self-expression can in fact become a much more sophisticated and maybe even a harsher form of social control. Because the command to be free, to be authentic, to enjoy yourself, that can feel like the most exhausting obligation of all. So we'll leave you with this to think about. When the main social command is no longer obey, but perform your own unique enjoyment, we have to start asking a different question. Who's setting the stage for that performance? And who really benefits when we all feel compelled to play our part?